So the NAL kickoff starts today. We will see who can make the Salt Lake City Major after a crazy Rostermania. So many insane transfers, so let's look over all of the teams and see which teams are most likely able to make the Major and who have gotten the best transfers in for their team. Probably the top seeder team going into NAL, the team that has only made one change, and that is Kino, unfortunately being either dropped or leaving MAT, but he's being replaced by SSG's Talisman in Ashen. Still keeping the core though of that major winning team with obviously Beast Coast and then MAE for Munich being Gaveni, Gunner, Hot and Cold, and Diffuser. A very strong roster with a lot of firepower now. Diffuser, Gavin, and Ash are going to be a tri-head spear with Hot and Cold in the back line and Gunner on the lurks. A very, very strong roster. Going to see how they're able to apply this new roster in their old system, just to see who will be on the shields. Obviously, you had Kino before, playing those shields, playing those Gladys plays. Who will maybe fill more into that soft spot role? Will it be Gunner, or will they have a new player like Ashen more put into that role? Now next on the chopping block, Wildcard also making only a single change. Dash went back to Brazil, but in replace they brought in another EU import, this time from the SI finalists and the EWC champions. It is their support player of Adrian. One of the best players last year in my opinion, a very strong rock player to pick up for themselves. How will he do with the eye gelling of Spiker? They keep, again, their own firepower, just like I meant, having a strong three-headed spear of Kazan Bay and Baby Shark. Three great players that really proved their worth last season. Obviously having some great finishes at both Munich and the Sixth Invitational, making main stage at both. Missing on EWC, but with this new season, they're looking at one of the top teams in NA for me. Moving on from two teams that made a single roster change each to a team that's made none. Seth came out saying that the team had great success nationally, but not great success internationally for their standards, and I'd have to agree. Shopify Rebellion keeping that same core of Canadian, Spoit, Rexin, Ambi, and Surf. A very strong roster in their own right, with, again, a lot of star power in Spoit and Ambi going to be looking to create that spearhead. But the issue has been, obviously, them internationally. I think that does come to the fact that Spoit really hasn't been himself in those international events. He's had poor performance after poor performance. They're looking for him to really try and step right back up into that star figurehead role to really help themselves push on forward. Whereas players like Ambi and Surf really have helped the team grow and just become a better team in terms of their great power plays, and then the supreme IGL and leadership from Canadian can really take them to that next level and maybe a major contending team like we all thought they could be. Moving on to an unknown team of sorts in Dark Zero. Obviously, the core of SSG has moved ships to Dark Zero in terms of Faults, J90, and Nuas. Strong players, and we saw how good they can be again in terms of nationally winning the NAL finals and winning stage 1. But again, it was internationally where they really struggled. Only MAE and Wildcard really had some great performances internationally for the NA region. So if a team like SG can really put forward for themselves, but they also have two new players. Well, not new players for Dark Zero. NJR obviously has been a Dark Zero mainstay for ages, and we know how great he can be. But for this core, they now have NJR and Kino, a player that won a major last year, his first international event, and really got into his rhythm for himself as a player. Really showed that he can be that top support player, that top shield player. So curious to see how this roster can do, and curious to see where that fragging power will come from. They don't really have that main spearhead. Normally you'd look at Nuis in terms of that, but he wasn't really seen as that first figurehead, that first entry, and even then that's only one player. Where is their second entry going to come from? Where is that second spear going to come from? I'm expecting maybe to see J90 back on that entry position that he used to play during his Disrupt gaming time, but time will tell to see if they can really stake a claim to a top spot in the North American League. From one core that moved to a different org to a core that moved to a new org in professional Rainbow Six Siege, it is 100 Thieves finally joining Rainbow Six Siege and joining the NAL with picking up Oxygen's core from last year, being Atom, Gomez, and Yoga, but also picking up former DZ and major winner Spirits, and then also picking up the player of Pambazu, who was retired for a teeny stint, but has now come back with a great team as well. Obviously, you have that XX set kind of core in terms of Yoga, Spirits, and Gomez, but then you also have the OXG core in terms of what I've already said. My curious point is going to be who's going to be IGLing this roster. I've heard mixed reports. Obviously, Yoga was IGLing OXG during the last SI, and they had some pretty poor performances in terms of their own skill level. Whereas I've also heard reports that Spirits could be in the IGLing booth, and I'd actually be kind of excited to see that because he can really build a roster and really get them forward over the finish line. But he will also still be on those cheese roles in terms of either playing the shields or playing even the Ying shotgun. But in terms of star power, in terms of talent, I think 100 Thieves could be one of those teams that really put themselves forward for a major spot. But again, there's 5 teams I've just mentioned that really could stake a claim to the major spot. But up next is going to be 5 teams that most people will see as the underdog for these events. And starting off those underdog teams, we have a new org in Rainbow Six Siege, professional at least. We saw them a lot in Tier 2, but it's 5 Fears. Leading line is JJ Ballsack, JJ Blast, whatever you want to call him. He continues his reign of terror in the NAL, surviving relegation last year, and he keeps himself rival from his last stint with Envy, and then brings back Snake. He was only gone for a little while during the LCQs, but he's now back and ready to fire with this core Envy trio, but bringing along ex-LFO member in terms of Fens, and then also a great leader in terms of what he can bring, and in terms of the experience he can bring in terms of a T1 level. It's Forest coming from that SSG slash OXG team he was obviously on last year, but he also came from a big SSG core. So it's an interesting team. I'm very excited to see how Fens can do, because I feel like Fens, he obviously did have a really poor stage 2, but I thought he looked good in stage 1 of last year, and he really impressed me during the SI LCQs, dropping over 10 kills every single map. So again, this team is one of those sleeper picks that I think could maybe squeeze by into a major contention with a team like Dark Zero, with 100 Thieves, with Shopify Rebellion, with those teams that maybe on the lower end of the qualification spots. So I think look out for 5 Fears. They could be a sleeper pick here. From a sleeper pick to a jinxie pick is going to be the main console stack, really, of SSG. It's looking like it's going to be maybe a content stack, but there's some firepower on this team. Obviously, you have Dream and Gitty from that Cloud9 roster. Gitty, who had some great performances during the stages and during LCQ, some really great plays from him. And everyone knows how great of a IGL and support player that Dream can be. But then you have the 3 somewhat unknowns. Aiden Taxi had a really good stage 2. He had an okay, I'd say, LCQ. Obviously, Ntax was also on that C9 roster with Dream, with Gitty during the LCQs. But then you've got 2 players that really doesn't have the great performances or the great experience that, say, someone like Dream and Gitty have. You have Rival GN and Raid Bullies. Obviously, Raid Bullies being a full-on rookie, whereas at least Rival GN has a little bit of experience playing the NAL finals, playing that SI LCQs with Dark Zero. But Raid Bullies, he's going to be that unknown. He proved in Tier 2 that he can hang with some of the best players in at least Tier 2, and he's now going to see if he can hang with the best players of T1. We saw his firepower up against OXG actually during the SI LCQ. I think he dropped like 20 kills. So he can hang with some of the top players. It's now if he can do it consistently, though. If he can continue dropping those numbers up against the best of the best, we'll have to wait and see. But this team, they could make some moves, but I will put them on the latter half of qualification here. Now on to a team that, if SSG had a lack of experience, then C9 have basically no experience, with 3 rookies on the board in terms of Center, Uzi, and Focal. All great players that were playing in and around Tier 2. Obviously, Center for that CLB roster. Uzi played for Fury of Frogs, but also played for Freaky Frogs during the Shopify Rebellion, or the Spoitifitationals is what it was called. And he did win it, so he had some great performance on that. And then Focal obviously was with that Aliex roster that won most of the T3 events in terms of, I think they won Blitz, they won TPL, the finale. They won Element 5. They won a lot during that year. So Foco was one of their best players. Him and Rival GN really helped that team go forward. But they then do have at least 2 players that have had Tier 1 experience before, being Eddie and Kixrow. 2 great players. Well, I think Eddie has been on the up since his LFO time. I think he was one of their best performing players from both Stage 1 and Stage 2. I'm just curious to see what Sender can bring to this roster in terms of his shield plays, because we all know how great of a shield player the center can be. And in terms of his IGLing, I think he improved LFO during SILCQs in terms of what he brought to the roster. But now can he bring it to a full new 5 and in the biggest stage in terms of NA Siege? We now take ourselves onto the final 2 teams, the Challenger Series teams, the ones that made the grind through Tier 2 to make it into Tier 1, and we will start with the ones that made it through that upper bracket, and that is Footlocker's finest, being Packer, Bino, Silo, Mike W, and Nate the Great, Nate38, Volsper. I think they've got some great players on this team. Obviously, Packer, he's been in T1 before, has all the experience in the world in terms of not only playing at international events, playing at a major, playing at SI, but just playing in stage in general. I think he has some great stints on Wildcard, Parabellum, but obviously he's never been able to stay in Tier 1. That's been the biggest issue for Packer, and I think this new role is going to help him a lot in terms of not being that main IGL, being that main second caller, with Bino being the main caller, being that main IGL. But he now has, in my opinion, some of the best players he's teamed with in terms of Volsper and Mike W. Obviously, Volsper, Silo, both being rookies as well. Mike W, kind of a rookie, only really played during the SILCQs, and even then he had to come through open, so it kind of felt like he was playing still as that T2 team. So he can be kind of considered as a rookie as well, but he is a great support player in terms of not only getting frags on the board, but always staying calm in situations in terms of clutches, and always being able to also give another voice in terms of the ideas. But the eyes for me are going to be on Volsper. He was the best player during Challenger Series, and in my opinion, was the best player in Tier 2 for quite some time. I think he's a very impressive player in terms of frag, but he's also a very smart player. He knows when to swing. He knows when he can team up with his teammate. He knows when to call for a drone, when to call for a double up, and he knows how to play in the clutch as well with Mike W. We saw some crazy clutches from him up against In Control / Outlast now. Obviously, the main question marks will be on Silo. He was a late addition to this main 4 stack. He was the final player to join, but I do think he's a good player in his own right and can really make a statement in this NAL season. The final team, and probably the ultimate underdogs, and maybe the biggest underdog story in Siege history. A 5-stack, 4 players who had never even really played in Tier 2 before, making it all the way, winning that lower bracket of Challenger Series to make Pro League. It is Outlast Gaming, led by their leader, the smartest TikToker in Siege. It's TrevMac with Logger, Millie, Voronix, and Nesta. A very good roster in my opinion, and the most important part for me will be if they have learned how to defend. Because I think their attacks were super impressive. In terms of IGLing, TrevMac was really good at telling his teammates what they should do, how they should do it, and even them as teammates as their own, they know what they're doing, they know how to form an attack, they can always give a secondary voice and a secondary idea, but TrevMac is really good at commanding his troops and making sure the attack goes over the line. The only issue was their defensive strats. Can they really be able to mold up a new idea on defense in terms of winning the win con and making sure they don't let the bomb go down and making sure they win out the round? I also want to see how Millie does on Wi-Fi. Obviously, he qualified to Pro League with a hotspot, so he could also be a great impact because he was dropping so many kills even on that hotspot. 10 a map, basically. Very impressed me. And maybe he'll use less DMRs this time around out, but who knows? He's a little bit of a DMR grudge. But also Nesta, he's that cheese player who was able to clutch up a lot, not only on the shields, but also on operators like Dokkaebi, like Ying, very much just, he's a mini Spirits, they called him, and I think I'd have to agree with that. I don't think he's up to that level yet, but he's got the potential, he's got the talent, he can definitely get there someday. So, while yes, Outlast maybe have the least amount of chances through a lot of people's eyes at making a major, making an event, and even making maybe top 6, or maybe even making playoffs, but I think they have promised, they have shown that they have potential in terms of their attacking. It's mainly down to the fact that can they button down their defenses and then have both sides, have both yin and yang, where they can really show that they are a top team in the North American League. That is all the teams, and that is every team's transfers broken down on what they have done and who they have brought in. Let me know what you think. Let me know who you think is going to qualify to the Salt Lake City Major and who maybe from NA even has a chance at winning it. My favourite, at least from NA, has got to be MAE in terms of firepower and in terms of the core they have. They've shown how great they can be in the past. Can they show it again? Time will tell. And also, I did mention it, but also Fabian as well. Like, he's inevitable. So, yeah, for me, MAE, they probably have the most likely chance. But like I said, don't sleep on Five Fears. I think they could be a sleeper pick here. Well, that's it from me. Hope you all have a great afternoon. And remember, like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.